Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm super excited to share with you my first Heffy Doodle project. It's an ocean-inspired Valentine's Day card. We're going to start with ink blending, so I'm getting out my glass mat and some watercolor paper. I'm going to be doing a lot on this paper, ink blending, die cutting, splattering, and I want to make sure that my paper will hold up to all of the things that I want to do. So I am using a thicker watercolor piece of cardstock. I'm using my Stormy Seas stencil to create the beach scene that I'm going to be making for my card. I placed the edge of my stencil that I wanted to create the waves splashing onto my beach on the edge of my paper, leaving about an inch of cardstock showing, and I distressed using my Distress Oxide in tea dye and just completely covered that section. I'm using a brown ink to splatter to make my beach look sandy. I just squished it onto my glass mat, sprayed some water, and used a paintbrush to pick it up and splatter onto the background. I'm also using some white ink with water as well and using another paintbrush to splatter on white. I really want my beach to look like it has a lot of texture and fun. And I used my hand just to cover up the other parts of my wave stencil. I didn't want to accidentally splatter in some brown where there is not supposed to be brown. I cleaned off my stencil and my glass mat, and then I'm realigning the stencil on the other side, this time covering up the brown. I'm using my Heffy memo tape to help keep everything in place while I am doing my blending. And I made sure to leave just a tiny little bit of that brown showing. I didn't want to risk there being a white gap. This is the technique that I use when I'm doing any ink blending with masking with stencils. And now I'm creating my ocean side of my beach card, and I'm using Salvage Patina, Mermaid Lagoon, as well as Salty Ocean, and just blending in between the three colors, going back until I like the blend, trying to create a little bit of a seamless look, but we are going to be adding another stencil. I'm using the Tiny Waves, and I'm just going to use my two darker shades of Distress Oxide, my Mermaid Lagoon and Salty Ocean, just to put in some random little waves. I'm not even making sure my stencil's not moving. I'm just going back and forth along the stencil with the colors just to add in a little bit of texture. Once that is done, I'm going to do more splattering just like I did on my beach side. So I'm going to bring out my water distress sprayer and I sprayed it into my hand, and I'm using my fingers to flick on some water, and then I will spray from higher up to get some smaller splatter. I didn't want really large splatter drops, and sometimes my distress sprayer can release some really big blobs of water. So those are the two things I like to do to create a little bit smaller blobs, less risk of getting too large of a blob. Now I squished on some blue ink and I'm splattering with that just like I did with the brown on the sand, but this time on my ocean. And then I will bring out my white ink again and just repeat the same process. I'm adding some water just to dilute it a little bit. And then I will use that paintbrush from earlier and splatter on some white. And I just think that this look overall makes a really nice ocean scene. This is one of my favorite scenes to ink blend. I love making ocean and beach cards with these colors, and I hope you'll try it out yourself too. I will have all the colors linked down below in the description box, so in case you missed it, you don't need to rewind. You can just scroll down and check it out later. I cleaned off my station, and now we're going to remove the glass mat because we're all done working with ink splattering and distressing. I'm going to use my Imperial Stitch dies to cut this out. This is the second from the largest size in the set, and now I have a nice stitched border on my background. I also want to add a little bit more texture. I love texture on my cards, and I'm going to be using the Stitched Heart background die, and I just centered it onto the die, and there you can see there's that subtle detail of the hearts in the background, which is going to make a great card for Valentine's Day or anniversary, or just a sweet love card to your partner. I am going to be stamping on my sentiment now. I'm using the sentiment to my significant otter from the Otter side stamp set. I have it lined up in my MISTI, and I'm going to be embossing. So I'm using some anti-static powder on the beach, and then use Versamark ink to add my ink to the sentiment. And then I will be using some white fine embossing powder to emboss the sentiment. So I just have a little coffee filter here, and I'm just going to pour on my embossing powder, and I will heat up my gun while I pick up that embossing powder because I've been known to spill everywhere, so I like to clean that up as soon as possible. And once my heat gun is all nice and hot, I went ahead and melted down that embossing powder to create my beautiful white sentiment on my beach. I have already stamped and colored and cut out my otters that are holding hands. They're so sweet. And a little red heart that I'm going to use on my card. I also want my otters to have a little bit of an interactive element. So I'm going to cut out or twist apart one of my dies from the straight slider die set. And I'm going to center it onto my background here. So I'm using more of my memo tape. I'm using my grid mat to line it up where I want my die to go, and then use that memo tape to hold it down, and I will die cut that out. I'm going to save that inner piece, not getting rid of it anywhere because I am going to use it later. Then I also stamped out a sentiment off camera using my Rascal Alphabetter stamp set and dies because I wanted to create my own sentiment for the bottom of the card, which is why I have that larger gap on the bottom. Now for my slider, I'm going to glue that die cut piece to my card base. Well, this isn't my base, my next card layer. And so I just lined up where I want my pretty ocean scene to be on that teal paper, and then glued that die cut piece back inside so it will be behind my slider, my little otters. You'll see when we put it all together that it helps just create a continuous scene. Now to create my slider, I grabbed the smallest circle from my Stitch Circle die set, and I'm running it through my mini die cut machine out of some craft foam, just some white foam. I like to use something a little thicker and smooth just to make sure that my slider can move. It has plenty of space and it won't get caught on anything inside of my card. To create some room on my slider to make sure there's plenty of space for my otters to move, I'm using my Heffy foam strips, adhesive foam strips, and I just cut some small little squares that will go onto those two little foam circles. And the reason why I'm doing two is because I want my otters to move up and down and not twist around sideways. So I use two just to create some stability. I am gluing my otters that I colored on alcohol friendly paper or alcohol marker friendly paper, and I'm gluing it to some extra thick white cardstock, another cutout piece, so that way it has a lot of stability as the card receiver may be moving this, or if I give it to my husband, my daughter might be playing with it a lot. So I want to make sure that my otters can sustain being moved up and down on the slider. I peeled off the release paper from the foam tape, and I'm lining up my foam circles to where they will line up inside of my slider. And then I pressed and sandwiched those pieces into the slider with my otters. So now my slider mechanism is all set up and I can adhere my ocean scene to my teal paper. So I'm using some Heffy Doodle foam tape to line everything up. I love this foam tape for anything interactive because it leaves plenty of room for everything to move. It really is the best foam tape for interactive cards. Once the back is all covered, I'm going to peel off all of the release paper, and then I will center that back onto my background, making sure my slider cutout piece lines up perfectly inside of the die cut onto my ocean scene. And I will line it up, make sure that before I press down that it is lined up on the top and bottom, and there you can see my cute little otters are moving, and when you move there is still that ocean scene behind them creating a continuous look. I'm going to glue on my little heart using my glue bird right to the center of my otters. I just think it's so cute. I absolutely love sea otters, and this set is one of my favorites. I die cut, like I said earlier, the sentiment "Let's hold hands" because my little otters are holding hands and I think they're so sweet. So I die cut this sentiment, and I'm going to be using my memo tape to help me put it onto my card. So I have it lined up on my grid mat. I'm pressing down on my sentiment, all those little individual pieces, and my memo tape will help keep my individual letters in place while I add my glue. Now my little apostrophe and S fall off because I'm tapping the glue because I accidentally put a little too much and I didn't want it to seep out, which is no big deal. They're in the center of my sentiment and I can add them back a little later, so I'm just placing them in my little tray here. I'm going to now adhere my sentiment to the card. So I'm putting the Let's Hold on top, and I'm going to press down, give it a little bit for the glue to dry, and then go back and burnish it down with my finger, and then I can peel off that memo tape, and you can see my sentiment went right exactly where I wanted it to go. The letters are lined up how I had them on my grid mat. This is my favorite way to add in individual letters for my sentiments on my cards. So I'm going to add that apostrophe and S. The glue was still wet, so I was able to add those in no problem. And then the second part of my sentiment is hands, and I'm just going to repeat that same process. Line everything up onto my glue mat, use my memo tape to pick it up, and then I will add the glue to the sentiment and then lay it down onto the card. So now my foreground is done. I absolutely love how this is turning out, and I can start getting my card together. I have a top folding A2 size card out of some extra thick white cardstock. I'm using my glue Burt to add some glue behind my teal paper, and then I will center this onto my card base, again using my grid mat just to help me with centering and making sure I have some nice clean lines on the sides. I have some little gems in my collection that I thought matched this ocean scene perfectly. They're kind of teal and blue colors. So I'm just going to use a jewel picker and my little glue Burt to glue down 5 of these gems around my card. And then to add one more finishing touch that I really like to do with wave beach scenes, I'm going to bring out some white liquid embellishment, and I'm just going to add it along the edge of my ocean. So you can see I'm layering down some of that white and then using the tip to spread some of that into the water. So I'm not necessarily always adding more of the white embellishment. I'm just spreading it into the ocean and making sure to leave it kind of messy looking. I want it to look like that water is crashing onto the shore and it's just creating a nice white edge to my water. Here's a final look at this adorable sea otter slider card. I'm so happy with my first project with Heffy Doodle, and I cannot wait to make and show you more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!